not just in Ogden, but throughout the Wasatch Front, which is affording a house and affording a place to live. Earlier this year, MarketWatch listed Ogden as one of the most affordable cities in the western United States to live. It also listed it as the 18th most affordable city in the United States. At the same time, a study conducted in September of 2022 found that Ogden possesses 65% of the low-income housing in Weber County, while only holding 35% of Weber County's residents. So, starting off with that information, do you think that housing affordability is a problem in Ogden? And what are your thoughts on how we can resolve that?
This is one of the most important topics we'll probably discuss in this election, because what we know about Ogden City is that we are growing. I think every resident in our city feels that, and I think the data that you've shared tonight supports that conversation. The MarketWatch study you're talking about combined housing with average median income combined with cost of living, right? So it didn't give us a full picture of what we mean by affordability. And so what I really like to focus on when having a conversation about housing is housing attainability. How are we providing pathways to ownership for those who want it? And how are we ensuring that we're serving our community in being able to live, work, and play here for generations, right? The decisions we make today in regards to housing policy will affect our kids and our kids' kids. Another study I want to introduce into the mix is a study from the Kelsey Gardner Policy Institute around housing and around population growth. The Policy Institute actually found that Ogden's population may nearly double by 2060. That's a pretty intimidating proposition, right? But what I've said on growth is very simple. I believe that at any age or at any stage of life, you should be able to afford a dignified place to live right here in Ogden City. That is a value that I've held for my entire life as an adult, and it's a value I hold as a public servant, and hopefully as the future mayor of Ogden City. I proposed expanding the Own an Ogden program, right? Right now, the Own an Ogden program provides approximately $10,000 in down payment assistance to anyone in our city to purchase a home. $10,000 is not the right size down payment assistance program anymore, considering our average home price. I want to expand that program to be especially beneficial for public servants like police officers and teachers, because I want those people living side by side as they serve our community. We as a Knuth administration, we want to look into exploring establishing a housing stability division in our administration. It would be the first of its kind in our city. And that division would be dedicated to ensuring the success of our current residents and future residents as it relates to their housing situation, be it renting, owning, whatever that looks like. We value our people who live in our community, which means we have to make those investments to match that sentiment. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, so let's expand on that just a little bit, because I think that you've addressed two issues that, of course, are competing, right? When you have high prices for housing, oftentimes that has to do with a lack of inventory, right? And at the same time, in order for people to work, play, and live in a city that they want to work, play, and live in, you have to be careful about overdevelopment. So in your administration, how would you be able to balance that? I mean, what are your thoughts on being able to actually balance having enough housing so that our kids and our grandkids can live in the community without also taking away some of the charm, some of the beauty, some of the things that everyone wants to be in Ogden for?
Sure. Well, first off, what I'll say is that same study I mentioned about Kelsey Gardner Policy Institute also talks about the cumulative shortage of available units in our state. And if I'm not mistaken, that number was in the high 20,000 for our entire state. And as the fastest growing state in the nation, as the state with one of the best economies in the nation, as the state with one of the youngest populations in the nation, we know that growth is coming our way. So a city government really needs to provide an ecosystem for broad spectrum housing to be supported across our city. We need to continue to grow in a way that's considerate of our community here. I think we've been sold a value proposition about growth in our city. That growth has to result in displacement of some kind, whether that's evictions or exclusions from the conversation, and I just don't know if I buy that. I want to share with you, I live on 25th Street, and anyone who knows anything about East Central Ogden knows that there's a very large hole in the center of our city where the old IGA or Rite Aid site used to be. And in the last several years, the city has actually purchased that property. They've raised most of the old buildings, and this is the Capitol Square development that will be phased out over the next few years, but it's going to provide some incredible new assets in my community that I'm really excited about. Let me tell you about the first one. The first phase actually just broke ground about a month ago. It's called Q25. It's an affordable apartment complex. The parking is located in a parking garage, and then we've got a few stories above that. And in a month or in a year or so, I'm going to get 220 something new neighbors, potentially more. I'm really excited about the proposition of my community growing. The second phase of this includes townhomes that will be for purchase, and the third part of this includes the potential for a grocery store. Now, as a resident that lives in East Central Ogden, who often has to drive a 10-minute drive or take a 15-minute bus to get access to quality, nutritious food, I'm really excited about the proposition of a new grocery store coming to my community. And these are the conversations that need to be elevated into the community space, right? When we talk about getting back to the basics of good government, and building our community and creating connections with our neighbors, that includes this conversation of growth. I'm ready to have these conversations. I'm ready to bring community together to confront these conversations and these challenges around growth. Specifically, let's talk about the general plan, right? The general plan is a plan that typically for municipalities governs the way that we grow, basically. It also governs how we engage our community, etc. And a good general plan for a municipal government, that's updated about every 10 years. Ogden's general plan has not been updated since the early 2000s. The good news is that the City Council and the Mayor have approved a budget allocation in this year's budget to create that plan. And the next Mayor's job is going to be centered around creating a general plan that is responsive and proactive in responding to this growth. I've pledged a few times now in these debates and in conversations with residents that we would commit to a general plan that is the most community-centric general plan that any government in the state has ever seen. In fact, I want to be a model for other states to do this general plan right. Because we know that when we leverage the power of our community, the input from our community into the work we do as a city, we will yield a better outcome for everybody involved.
So does the existing master plan, or the one that you would envision, should you become mayor, include additional low-income housing? And I just mentioned this idea of maybe Ogden having more of that low-income housing than the rest of the county. Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. But what are your thoughts on low-income housing specifically, given the disparity between Ogden and the rest of the county? And do you advocate or support having more in the community?
I'm an advocate for broad spectrum housing. And I'm an advocate for ensuring that the neighborhoods of our city are balanced. I think that if you look at the statistics, especially around poverty in our city, there are incredibly high concentrations of poverty that are reserved to certain neighborhoods. In fact, some of them are as high as 68% of a neighborhood experiencing poverty, which is not a dignified way to live, in my opinion. I think we really need to expand our options for our community across the entire spectrum of housing and work with our incredible partners in the city, like Weber State, like United Way, and all of the other incredible health and human services providers to actually serve that community. I mean, United Way just announced today a $300,000 grant from Intermountain Healthcare to address this very topic. And I look forward to working with these partners and creating connections with our neighbors and ensuring that every person in our community, regardless of the age or stage of their life, can live right here in Ogden.
As I recall, reading about that new grant, one of the things I thought was very interesting, and you touched on this in your previous comments, is this idea of that grant also supporting Intermountain Healthcare's own employees. As a mayor, it does seem to me like one thing that would be important would be to have the people that are serving the community living in the community.
Absolutely.
How important is that to you, and what specifically do you think you or your administration could do to help teachers, police officers, fire department employees, city employees, to not just be serving in Ogden, but also serving themselves by living in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as a public servant of over a decade now, public servants are often underpaid, public servants are often overworked, and this is a reality that we know extends to every occupation you just said, but especially our Ogden City Police Department. Our Ogden City police officers are responding to more calls per hour than any other force in the state. They're lower pay, they start at a lower pay than our neighboring cities. And I want to give credit where credit is due in saying progress has been made to confront both of those challenges. But what you're asking about is essentially promoting an ecosystem where public servants can live here, right? And Ogden has a history of this, right? We used to have a cop on the block program that helped cops move here into the city. We also have a car incentive program for our Ogden City police officers where they can take their car home regardless of where they live. And so that Own an Ogden program that I mentioned earlier, I mentioned expanding it to be especially beneficial to police officers and school teachers. That's sort of an incentive for individuals to choose to live in Ogden. I'm more of a carrot than a stick kind of person, right? And so I want to encourage the behaviors we want to see in our public servants by providing that pathway to homeownership or living in our community and make it a little bit easier for those people to invest in our community, because having cops, having teachers, having public servants in our city, it benefits us all. So
great. Let's shift tracks for just a minute. You mentioned the police. Recently, Fox 13 had a story about an alleged effort by the Ogden Police Department to engage in some kind of a ticket quota system. And it's a little unclear as to whether it is or is not, or was not a quota system. But the issue at one point was so bad that a police officer on air stated that there is no trust. We don't even trust our own administration. Why would we expect the public to trust? Do you feel that Ogden citizens trust their police department?
I think that's a question for Ogden citizens. And what I'll tell you is, in the thousands of conversations that I've had with our residents about this election and about the future of our city, public safety is a concern. People want to live in a community where they feel safe and they are safe and they feel secure and they are secure. Now, you asked about the ticket quota system. I have faith in our elected officials to add clarity to the law in question, because it's very obvious that the law needs some clarifying and needs some working. And as far as the officer in that dark interview, I feel dismayed that anybody in our city would feel like they can't approach leadership of the city to solve a conflict like this. And building trust with our community, creating connections with our communities, these are basic tenets of good government. And I'm committed to being the most accessible and transparent and fair mayor. I want to, I mentioned in my launch in January that I wanted to be the mayor that knows the names of the barbers and the bartenders and the police officers and the postal workers, and this sort of culture of engaging with our community and showing up as my full authentic self and showing up with a listening ear. It's what I'm demonstrating tonight in being here and engaging in this important conversation, and it's what I'll demonstrate for years to come in service to our city, because we know that when we listen and when we put people back at the center of local government, we have better outcomes.
Yeah, I think certainly listening is a key skill of any good leader. Do you think that the issues that have come up related to this, or maybe other things, are a management or leadership problem with the police department? Or
I think the law needs to be clarified. And I think we need to ensure that as a police force, we're following the laws that are on the books. And I think it's very obvious in this situation that there's not clarity in the state law on this topic.
So let's talk a little bit more about public safety. As the mayor, you're obviously going to have a lot of work to do in public safety should you be elected. What are your priorities for both our police and fire and other organizations that work directly as first responders in Ogden?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think I mentioned earlier that public safety is the beginning and the end of back to the basics of good government, right? What I'll say on the topic is our police officers have a really tough job. Our officers, like I mentioned earlier, are responding to more calls per hour. They are underpaid, and they spend a lot of time in their cars writing reports. So, I really, the goal in a Knuth administration really would be to get our officers out of their cars and onto the streets, building relationships with our community. This involves better resourcing them, right? Let's talk some specifics. So in Weber County and for Ogden Police Department, we have a mental health crisis outreach team. This team is dedicated to responding to mental health crisis calls. What we know about this team is that they're understaffed and under-resourced. We need to work with our partners at the county to increase staff and to increase resources so that we can respond to more mental health calls, because those are on the rise. The homeless service advocates, right? This was a grant provided by Intermountain Healthcare to the Ogden City Police Department to install 2 full-time social workers in the Ogden City Police Department, really ingrain them into the functions of our police department. Again, understaffed and under-resourced. We could probably have 4 or 5 of these homeless service advocates that are helping to decrease call volumes and make the job of a police officer here in the city a little bit more easy. And I want to talk a little bit about an experience I had with Ogden City Police. A few years ago, Chief Watt was still the chief of police. He called me one day and he said, you're the chair of the Ogden City Diversity Commission. I want to build better relationships with our community. How do I do that? And I said, Chief, well, I don't really know, but what I do know is that something powerful happens when we come together to have a conversation. So I committed to meeting with Chief Watt about once a week for the entire summer. And I committed to help Chief Watt convene a meeting of city leaders and cops. And something really incredible happened in that room, in those rooms throughout the summer. We had hard conversations, we had uncomfortable conversations. But at the end of the day, I feel that we had conversations that were in service to better outcomes for our community, which is why I continue to show up. And today, you can actually point to Ogden City Police Department's website, and there's a data transparency dashboard for the first time in the history of Ogden City Police. You can also see in the last few years, we've hired more officers, more female officers and more officers of color than ever before. This is a result of those conversations. I'm really proud of the work that we did as a community. We did this together. And really, that's what getting back to the basics of good government is. It is about building community and creating connections with our neighbors. So the conversation of police officers and of building trust with our community, it's one of the most important conversations we can have, and we should have it together. Now, you talked about fire. Our firefighters are incredible. We have some of the best firefighters in the state. But what we know about the equipment they're using is it's a little out of date. And we could be innovating in the fire department as well. I proposed purchasing additional lightweight response vehicles because a lot of the calls our firefighters go on, they're taking that big truck out and they might not need to, right? And so a lot of fire forces across the entire country are investing in what are called lightweight response vehicles because these vehicles allow just 2 fire officers to go out instead of 3 or 4. And they're also much better on our environment. They're much easier on our roads. And at the end of the day, it's a fiscally responsible decision to make because those trucks are pretty expensive each time they leave that station. So we have some of the finest in the entire state. And so this conversation really is about working with our community to increase that relationship. Good question.
Yeah, so I think that you touched on something, and you've touched on it a couple of times now, which is this idea of the importance of community. I almost get the sense of the community kind of taking responsibility for itself, right? And you mentioned community-oriented policing, and I think that that's a really interesting concept. I'd love for you to kind of expand a little bit on that. I think that maybe in a similar vein, there have been issues at Ogden High School with school resource officers, which I believe Ogden City provides the police for. What are your thoughts on community-oriented policing in particular, but more specifically when we're talking about in schools and how as mayor, you might be able to affect and work with the school system to make sure that officers are doing things that they should be doing and really helping the students out.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll say on this is a few months ago, Ogden City Police Department convened a picnic with the police in Lester Park, which is my neighborhood park. And they hired a food truck, they had a DJ there, they put up some soccer nets and threw out a ball. And I've watched these events over the years evolve, right? When I first started going to these kind of community outreach events held by the police department, we were getting 4 or 5 people at a coffee shop. And this last event maybe had 400 or 500 people. And not only 400 or 500 people, but 400 or 500 people that I knew and recognized as my neighbors, young people, old people, everything in between. And it was this really powerful moment to me, watching our Ogden City police officers go up to this taco truck and get some food with our neighbors, or dance in front of a DJ, or play flag football. This was a really powerful moment to me because it wasn't about a negative interaction. Most people who interact with our police officers are doing it on what could be their worst day of their life, right? And so when we can remove that interaction from that situation and frame it as a positive, we're changing the lives of Ogdenites, but especially young people who often want to have good interactions with our police force. Now, working with our school district, this is another important conversation. Our campaign has proposed working with Ogden School District to create crisis response plans for each and every one of our schools in the city. This includes responding to mass casualty incidents and natural disasters and everything in between. Now, I'll be pretty clear on my stance on the Ogden mayor's involvement in education, and I think at the end of the day, we have an elected body, the Ogden School District Board of Educators. There are 7 of them. They are incredibly qualified to do their jobs. They're elected by our constituencies, and they are tasked with serving Ogden School District. They then appoint a superintendent, and I don't believe that the mayor's job is to tell them what to do. Now, what you will find in a Knuth administration is a ready and willing partner, willing to engage in any conversation that the Ogden School District wants to have about school safety, about our school resource officers, even about school lunch. I really don't care what the topic is. I will show up regardless, like I've done tonight, and be a ready and willing partner to engage in the conversation.
Great. Let's shift tracks just a little bit. This might be kind of a connection between some of our discussion about public safety and some of our discussion about housing issues. In August, the City Council, on a 6-1 vote, enacted a new homeless ordinance. That new ordinance, according to the Standard Examiner, creates a prohibition on homeless encampments on public property, limits the time that someone can leave their personal property on public property, as well as being able to park a car or other kind of vehicle and stay in that vehicle on public property. How big of a problem do you think homelessness is in Ogden? Do you think that the City Council made the right move here? And what would you do as the mayor to work on this issue that's a growing issue throughout the Western United States?
Yeah, again, a really important topic. I don't know if Ogden City or our elected body of Weber County have really acknowledged the crisis that is our unsheltered population in our city. That said, this is a crisis confronting every city in the state and every city in the country. And I want to say a few things. I have been personally connected and love someone who has experienced chronic homelessness for the last 30 years. And I'm sure that some of us, or many of us in this room, have a connection to someone who is experiencing being unhoused. And oftentimes when our public officials talk about this conversation, they miss the humanity. They miss the dignity that should be inherent in every person in our city. And that conversation that happened in early August around camping and personal items in a park, I think it missed the boat on centering humanity and centering dignity. Now you asked if I support this, correct? I don't, because what is the difference of me going to my local park with a blanket and a bag full of food, or maybe my backpack, and falling asleep on the lawn for a few hours? Would I be subject to the same humiliation as someone who is unhoused? Probably not, because I'm wearing a suit right now. I'm presenting as someone who is housed, right? And so there's a lot of assumptions that were made in the ordinance that we did pass. And I think that's problematic for the reasons I just described, but also because we're forgetting about the humanity of people in our community. I have said very clearly that regardless of what age or stage you are in life, you deserve to live in our city. And I consider our unhoused population residents of our city who should be cared for. They should be cared for. Now, I want to say another thing about this topic. As someone who's been involved in this conversation for nearly a decade now, I was the chair of the Emergency Food and Shelter Board that was responsible for distributing hundreds of thousands of dollars to service providers in our city every single year. I served on the local homelessness coordination council with Weber County. I was on the trust for the Homeless Trust Fund, which again distributed a few $100,000 every year to service providers in our community. So I have seen firsthand the excellent work that is being engaged in by this nonprofit, private, and public service providers that service this community. And what I have found is that these people are some of the most compassionate, passionate, highly qualified, and dedicated individuals in our city, and they're doing work that matters so much in the larger scheme of things. And those are the people who I want to work with to address this issue. You know, there is no silver bullet to homelessness. If there was, we would have solved it by now. It's a complex issue that requires bold leadership and partnership in bringing the right people to the table. But what we do know is that the best way to prevent or to solve homelessness is to prevent it. And when I mentioned all of our communities that are currently experiencing poverty, these are community members who are one emergency away from joining our unhoused population. And that's a terrifying proposition for me as a normal resident, but also for me as someone who could potentially leave this city one day. And so I want to make sure that this conversation is wider and more robust and inclusive of the people who are one emergency away from homelessness and the people who are currently experiencing it.
I think you bring a really interesting perspective to this. And so this next question, I think, should be an interesting one to hear your response to. Earlier you mentioned how you feel like there might be a role for police to help in some homelessness issues earlier in our conversation. Just this week, a homeless man was arrested for attempted murder for stabbing another individual. For a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, there is a perception that homelessness and crime are closely connected. Do you think that that is a reality or a perception? And based on that, what are your thoughts on how, as a city, and particularly as a mayor, you can work on those kind of issues?
Yeah, you know, I am a student researching economic mobility at the University of Utah. I'm getting my PhD. I'm taking a sabbatical though, don't worry.
Yeah, it does seem a little
insane. And what I have found, and what so many other researchers have found on this topic, is the only correlation with crime that scientific scholars, researchers have been able to find is with poverty. And it's not with your gender, it's not with your class, it's not even with your housing status. It is poverty. And so this is the conversation I want to have, right? Ogden City's poverty rate in the 2020 census, if I'm not mistaken, was approximately 14.2% of our city experiencing poverty. And what we know about poverty statistics is that they're a little bit out of date. So I would speculate that that number is probably higher because the definition is a pretty low bar. And to put that number in perspective, it's about 13,000 residents who are currently experiencing poverty. This rate is more than double the state average, and it's double most of our neighboring cities in the county. And like I mentioned earlier, some of that poverty is concentrated in neighborhoods in excess of 60 to 80%. That's a concern for me. I think that our city should be doing more to identify the root causes of crime, and those root causes of crime are often our economic circumstances. Now, what can the government do about that, right? I've talked a lot about economic development, right? I'm an economic development professional by day, and I have been for 3 years. And I spend a lot of time talking about these topics. And I believe that our economy should center the humanity and dignity of every resident in our city. And so we should be creating an economy that works for them. Historically speaking, Ogden works really hard. We're a very blue-collar town. We have grit, we have resiliency, and manufacturing jobs have tended to be our kind of bread and butter as a city. But they're not incredibly high-paying jobs, right? So in a Knuth administration, we would seek to expand our economic development opportunities to be inclusive of an economy that provides better income support for our residents, right? I'm a firm believer in the work being done around our aerospace and defense industry here in Ogden City. I'd be a mayor that's committed to bringing those types of jobs to our community. And I'm a firm believer in an economy that's responsive to the needs of our small businesses, right? We have spent a lot of time as a city giving out incentives to developers to build housing and mixed use spaces, which is very important, and I support the idea and concept. But we also need to do better about supporting our small businesses. Our small businesses in Ogden are the lifeblood of not only our city, but especially 25th Street. And these are individuals who have dedicated countless dollars to making their business work for them and for our community. So I would seek to expand the services offered to our small businesses. We are, like I've mentioned a few times, our growth trajectory is high, which means a lot of construction and a lot of displacement of parking. And so we as a city should be working with our small businesses to ensure they have the resources to keep the lights on through some of this construction. We recently tore up 25th Street and we lost some really good businesses because the walkability of that neighborhood and kind of the ability to engage with that business were reduced. So we're proposing small business construction mitigation grants. If you have a construction project that the city is leading out on and it's hurting your bottom line, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you a small grant to make sure you can cover rent each month. We want to invest in facade improvement as well, right? The facade is the calling card of any business, right? So we want to make sure that our small businesses can succeed. And at the end of the day, this is all in service to creating a safer, more secure community for everyone in our city.
I had a number of questions related to economic development. You answered them all, so I don't need to ask them.
It's all good.
I do think that Ogden, there is this, I don't even know how to describe it, but there's this strong sense of community, a vibrant small business community, and you talk about 25th Street, you talk about some of these other areas, and there is, I think, a pride in the community and the things that people are building. These programs that you're suggesting, that you're talking about, sound really great. What do you think needs to happen for the average Ogdenite to be able to feel like they can open up their own business, or that they can be a part of something that is a little bit bigger than just them, right? Because I think that is really, when I walk down 25th Street, or when I engage with businesses in the Ogden area, those small business owners, I think, feel like they're doing more than just running a restaurant, or just running, whatever shop they're running.
There was like 2 questions.
I know, and I don't remember. Just give me your thoughts. How do you inspire more people to be like that? That's what, to me, it seems like what you're trying to say to us is that Ogden is a special community, and what's going to build Ogden up is itself. It's the community, right? It's not necessarily even you. So how, as a mayor, can you instill that sense of community in people that may not feel like they're a part of it yet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that entrepreneurial, innovative spirit is inherent in every Ogdenite. I really, really do. It's true today. It was true 170-something years ago when we founded our city. I like to say that Ogden City has been building the city of the future long before it was cool to do so, right? A dense urban core was how we founded 25th Street. We had a light rail system that connected every corner of our community, and we developed along that transit corridor commercial spaces, residential spaces, everything in between. This idea of balanced neighborhoods, that's also been inherent in Ogden, right? Jefferson Avenue was known as Millionaire's Row. It was right next to Porter Avenue. You can still, to this day, stand on the corner of 25th and Jefferson and point to single-family homes that are historic. You can point to townhomes that are historic, and you can point to apartments that are historic. So this idea of a balanced neighborhood, this idea of broad spectrum housing, this idea of transit-oriented development, and this idea of a dense urban core, they've been here for over a century. So what we're talking about and getting back to the basics of good government is actually a return to where we were. It's a return to this innovative, gritty, resilient spirit that has been inherent in our community. Now, you talked about how do we instill that or inspire that in residents who may not feel that. At last week's debate for LUPEC, We talked specifically about how to increase Latina or Latino engagement in small business. The good news is that we live in a community where Suazo Business Center exists, and where we have a strong partnership already with Ogden City and Suazo Business Center to help do exactly what you're talking about, Jeff. So really, this conversation isn't about me, or my leadership. This conversation is about our community and about how the mayor can best really get out of their way and provide an ecosystem where they can succeed. That can include a more robust partnership with Suazo so that they can continue to serve more people. That can include a better relationship with our small business center through Weber State, so again, they can serve more people. But it can also include, like I mentioned earlier, expansion of incentive programs to allow that small business economy to thrive.
Great, thank you. Let's shift just a little bit. I want to talk about one of Ogden's greatest neighbors, the Great Salt Lake. A recent Deseret News Hinckley Institute of Politics poll found that 68% of people surveyed are concerned about the state of the Great Salt Lake. But there's very little consensus on how to resolve those concerns. The poll found, that this was really interesting, that 30% of Utahns felt like limiting drastically or completely any kind of development was the appropriate action. And that number jumps up, and that means houses, industrial buildings, business buildings. I thought that it was interesting because that number jumps up to about 43% for people under 25 years old. So Ogden, like a lot of areas along the northern part of the Wasatch Front, is a close neighbor to the Great Salt Lake. With the affordability issues that we've already discussed, with the potential for future growth, what are your thoughts on what a city like Ogden can do to help preserve the Great Salt Lake and work towards keeping the Great Salt Lake at least what it is, if not what it once was?
Yeah, what I'll say is it's not what we can do, it's what we should do. And let me tell you what I mean by that. When I say creating connections and efforts to get back to the basics of good government, I mean the connections with our built and our natural environment. And I feel very strongly that Ogden City has not only the opportunity but the obligation to address the shrinking of the Great Salt Lake. Now, I have been working on a project related to saving the Great Salt Lake in my real job for quite some time now, and I've dug into this issue, and I learned a lot. Not many people know that the Great Salt Lake is a terminal body of water, meaning that once the water gets there, it doesn't go anywhere, it evaporates and gets back into the watershed, right? And that terminal body of water is fed by three main tributaries: the Jordan River in Salt Lake City, the Weber River in Ogden City, and the Bear River in northern Utah. And these three tributaries feed the Great Salt Lake, and they are the only thing feeding the Great Salt Lake, right? When that water evaporates, it goes into the mountains, it comes down through the valley, and it ends up there. So we not only have the opportunity, but we have the obligation to serve and save the Great Salt Lake, even though it's not our namesake. We have talked about creating a sustainability solution center, right? I'm really worried about the efficiency of our water delivery system here in Ogden City. We're one of the oldest established cities along the Wasatch Front, which means that our infrastructure is degraded. Some of our pipes are 130 plus years old. The 36-inch line that comes down Ogden Canyon is leaking 1 million plus gallons of water per day. And when I read the 2020 water quality report for Ogden City, it said something to the effect of Ogden's water system is delivering approximately 19 million gallons of water a day to Ogden residents, which equates to be about 8 billion gallons of water a year. A mayor along the Wasatch Front recently announced that their city was going to be donating their water, treated wastewater, back to the Great Salt Lake instead of selling it off to agriculture or farm. And 13 billion gallons of water now will end up back in the lake. I want to explore doing just that for Ogden City, donating our 9 billion annual gallons of water back to the Great Salt Lake and helping raise the lake level. Because at the end of the day, this conversation really is about raising the lake level back to a healthy level so that we can ensure, the lake effect and the entire ecosystem that is supported by the lake is sustained for generations to come. And what we know about this conversation, it's actually the fiscally responsible thing to do. Because our entire economy is built on the Great Salt Lake. We do not have world-class skiing and powder days without the Great Salt Lake. We do not have clean air to breathe without the Great Salt Lake and its future success. Let me get back to the Sustainability Solutions Center. And I just really like not having a time limit. Can I say that? Like I don't have to talk as fast. The Sustainability Solutions Center. So this was actually an idea cooked up when I worked at Weber State a few years ago and raised money for Weber State's Office of Sustainability, which is one of the most incredible sustainability offices in the country, just for the record. We are sitting on the grounds of a campus that is one of the greenest campuses in the country. And it's not for my job to brag about them, but really look it up. They're doing some incredible work around sustainability right here on campus of Weber State. And we as a city should learn from that. And when I was here a few years ago, we actually assembled a white paper and we called it the Sustainability Solutions Center. And the idea was that we would meet residents where they were at on this topic. Not everybody has $400 to buy an electric lawnmower because not many people realize that their single engine lawnmower is one of the worst emitters of carbon that we can use on any given day. And so in working with the Sustainability Solutions Center, they actually created a lawnmower exchange program. And so instead of $400, residents were paying $25 to $50 and exchanging their old lawnmower for a new lawnmower that cleaned our air and kept our environment sustainable. A Sustainability Solutions Center would be realized in a Knuth administration in partnership with Weber State so that we can help our residents transfer and really change out a lot of their inefficient taps, toilets, thermostats, lawnmowers, other yard equipment, even incentive programs for changing over their turf, right? Ogden City did attempt a Flip the Strip program last year. If anyone tried to participate, you probably didn't have a great experience. But the basics of good government is a responsive government. And we would ensure that the Sustainability Solutions Center works for the benefit of our residents.
So I think you've obviously touched on something that's important to you.
Very important.
I want to just expand on that a little bit. A recent Weber State poll indicated that about 45% of Ogden residents think that Ogden should stay in the Community Renewable Energy Program. This is a program that Ogden joined, has put about $70,000 into so far, has more money to put into it, but the idea is to make the city 100% renewable by 2030. There's been a lot of talk about whether the city should or should not stay a part of this program. What are your thoughts on that? And how would you move forward to make sure that Ogden doesn't step back from that goal?
Yeah, I think in order to talk about this, we have to go back a little bit further from a Weber State survey that was done before we bought into this program, which found that high 70% of our residents agree with a move to transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030. And so when our city council passed the funds to join this body of 18 municipal governments across the Wasatch Front, we committed to fulfilling an obligation that our residents asked for, right? And super majority of our residents asked for us to do this. And we have engaged in good faith through the leadership of Chair Traburka in this conversation. We're the second largest city in the state to participate in this program, and Angela holds a leadership position on this body. And so this conversation about the Community Renewable Energy Program, I've been all in from day one because I understand that we need leadership that matches the urgency of this moment. We are nested along the beautiful Wasatch Front. We are not immune to severe weather. We witnessed a land hurricane in the last 3 years. We witnessed an earthquake, obviously a global pandemic, and all of these things require leadership that's thinking of the next generation. And this conversation of a transition to fossil fuels, this conversation of ensuring the long-term success of our environment through investments today, we're making these decisions for our kids and our kids' kids. And we need leadership, like I said, that matches the urgency of this moment. And this moment is very urgent, and it's a crisis in need of bold leadership and investments in programs like the Community Renewable Energy Program that put people at the center of local government, which is exactly what our campaign has been about from day one.
So as I was coming in today, I happened to see the Ogden Express. The Ogden Express is a new bus system that goes from the front runner down through the city and then up here to Weber State. And as Ogden continues to grow, it seems like there's only so much that can be done to expand roads, to build out the opportunity for a car-centric community. What improvements do you feel like the mayor can engage in to help with public transportation? And what will you do to advocate both within the city and outside of the city to bring public transportation into Ogden?
Yeah, this is a great conversation. I've ridden OGX a few times now, and I encourage everybody in our city to ride it. It's not only easy, but it's really accessible. We rode it on the other day with a friend that's in a wheelchair. It's super easy to get on and off with those platforms, and those platforms actually instill in our community a deeper trust in public transit. When people take public transit, they're usually worried about two things: efficiency and cost. Cost is not a barrier for this because it is free to everyone who wants to ride it for the first 3 years. So that's right. We did it right with there. And efficiencies is another conversation, and OGS is incredibly efficient. We can get from the front runner to Weber State in 14 to 17 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, because it has a priority signal all the way up. And the UTA released their kind of initial findings, and it sounds like we saw about 15,000 riders during the first month of operations, which is a success. When Weber opened up the route from the D Event Center to Central Campus, they were seeing about 2,000 to 3,000 daily riders, which again is a success. So in the conversation of growth, you are absolutely correct. We are not making more land as a city. So this conversation of how we move people around, it really matters. And remember when I said earlier that Ogden used to be connected from corner to corner, coast to coast, basically, with the most incredible light rail system. We figured this out 170 years ago. We can definitely figure out how to move people around today. And the OGX represents a really incredible option, especially considering that all of those buses are electric. They're producing no carbon into our atmosphere. And they're serving people who want to move around our city in a healthy, thriving economy. Especially in a city that's growing and like we are, it really is going to be reliant on how we move people around the city. This includes public transit, but this also includes active transportation like bikes and scooters. A few years ago, Mayor Caldwell invested in an incredible bike master plan that laid out how we could connect our entire city with bike lanes and get people from anywhere in our city from point A to point B. It's an ambitious plan. I don't think we've done enough to actualize that plan and get it moving as quickly as we need to, right? So I want to invest in public transit, but I also want to invest in active transportation networks.
So you touched on something that is interesting. I'd like your opinion on, which is the first 3 years are free if you want to ride the Ogden Express, but at some point that's going to end. As an effort to increase the use of public transportation, do you advocate free fares?
Absolutely, especially on our months where our air quality is so poor. Free Fare Februaries is one of the best programs that UTA has come up with in a long time. And we need more of those times. And this is not an issue that's not unpopular across the entire political spectrum and across our entire state. Governor Cox supports Free Fare February anymore. So, and I think we have a legislature that's invested in double tracking the front runner. They've invested in the bus rapid transit right here in Ogden. And we also have a federal transportation administration that's supportive of these sort of investments. So yes, it's free for 3 years. And if I were the mayor, I would seek to continue those free fares, because at the end of the day, it's what's serving our community. It's creating connections with our neighbors. It's preserving the character of our city, and it's building our community. So that is getting back to the basics of good government. So I'm all in and I support.
Great. So we only have a few minutes left.
It's been an hour already?
Yeah, I've only talked for like 35, 40 seconds, so you can't blame me. But I do have 2 questions left, so I want to make sure that we get to them. So just keep that in mind. But the first one is, we have talked about all sorts of things. We've talked about public transit. We've talked about community policing. We've talked about finding ways to have public servants stay in their community. We've talked about the Great Salt Lake. We've talked about a lot of things. I'm not sure that any of these things come without some cost. As a mayor who has a broad vision of how the city of Ogden can change and should change, how do you pay for all of this stuff?
It's a great question, and it's an economic development question, right? So how are cities funded, right? You have property taxes, you have sales tax, some grants are usually mixed in. Ogden City doesn't do a great job at sales tax revenue. I'm just going to be pretty honest. A city of our size could probably be pulling in 3 or 4 times the amount of sales tax revenue that we actually bring in. We're not lucky like our neighboring cities, Riverdale, who have franchise farms and are selling cheeseburgers and cars to everybody from the entire county, right? And I don't want to be like that. I want Ogden's success to be determined by the people that are already here and making investments in businesses and in people that will yield the highest return. So I'm keenly aware that these conversations we're having all come with a price tag, but I'm also keenly aware of how local government can and should work. I've worked in local government for 3 years. I worked in higher ed for 3 years before that. And I worked in nonprofits for a few years before that as well. So I have a decades-long career in public service. I know how to do a lot with a little, right? Anybody who works in a nonprofit or is a public servant understands exactly what I'm talking about. Local government, I've said this before, is an aircraft carrier and not a speedboat. It requires the right people with the right amount of resources at the right time, pulling the right levers to turn the boat even the slightest degree. So, a Knuth administration would be a pro-economic development administration that seeks to maximize the potential in our sales tax, but also in our property tax. There's a concept in urban planning that centers around taxable value per acre. And it's, a plot of land with a gas station on it. It's going to yield far less property tax than let's use the restaurant that's on 25th Street, Table 25, that has a beautiful restaurant on the main floor and condominiums on the second and third floor. That's going to yield a far greater return for our residents than a Come and Go or a Sinclair, right? So maximizing the best use and the highest use of land in our city, especially in our downtown core and the other nodules of our community that can be booming business areas, that's going to be a priority as well. So I'm aware that it all costs money, but I also have a plan to confront the conversation of increasing sales tax and property taxes to cover the bill.
Great. So last question. I couldn't help but notice on your website that you are renovating a 132-year-old Victorian home. 33 now. So as someone who lives in a home that's about 110 years old, I know that when you say renovating, it just never stops, right? It's just like you have to use the present tense because it's always happening. Obviously, history is important. Historical buildings are important. Architecture is important. These are things that kind of are a window into the soul of a community. Yeah. We've had a long conversation about a lot of different things about how to make Ogden a vibrant, modern, wonderful city, even more so than it is now.
Yeah.
As mayor, what would you do to lead Ogden into the future while making sure that you preserve the best parts of its past?
Jeff, you can just share with them my campaign platform, because that's a huge pillar, is preserving the character of our city. And you're right, Sean and I do have a 133-year-old Victorian on 25th Street that we purchased a little over 5 years ago, and we did not know what we were doing. We wanted a bigger house than we had before. And usually bigger means older in our city. And it was a little daunting, the idea of renovating a 133-year-old house. But what I've learned throughout the renovation process and in establishing our family in this neighborhood is Ogden City takes care of each other. We live in a historic neighborhood. There's tons of historic homes all around us. And I can't tell you how many times I've called a neighbor and said, "Do you have a jackhammer?" And normally people would say no, but in our neighborhood they say yes. And pretty soon I have a chipping hammer and I'm chipping away 4 inches of tile and cement out of my kitchen that wasn't finished for 6 months, for the record. Preserving the character of this house has been an honor of a lifetime, especially doing it with my partner, Sean, and our two dogs and cat who often get in the way. And really doing it with our community, and that's what we need to do as a city moving forward. Let's talk about the Union Station. The Union Station is an incredible asset to our community, but I'm also personally connected. My grandfather, his first job was at the Union Station. He was a Gandy dancer, and before you say, what the heck is a Gandy dancer? I don't really know what it is, but I know he stood in the lobby and he greeted people as they came and went on their trip with the Amtrak. So, the Union Station conversation has erupted as a pretty important issue in our community, and rightfully so. And we have, I think, missed the boat on engaging our community in a proactive way. And so we're doing a lot of reacting to the rumors, to the disinformation, to the worries, and they are all valid. And so when we talk about getting back to the basics of good government by putting people back at the center, we seek to be proactive and not reactive in the preservation of the character of our city, from the Union Station to my home on 25th Street and everything in between.
Thank you. Well, you may have heard the clock toll 7, so that is it.
Wow.
We are all done. Would you like to provide any concluding remarks?
Yeah, I just want to close with how I opened, which is a heartfelt thank you. Thank you to the Alliance for a Better Utah Institute. Thank you for everyone in the audience today who took time out of their schedule, who got a babysitter or canceled plans with friends to be here today. This is the conversation I wanted to participate in today, and I'm really glad we're having it. When we set out to run this campaign on January 9th of this last year, we really didn't know how people would respond. Getting back to the basics of good government by building community, creating connections with our neighbors, preserving the character of our city, what does that all mean? And we've been able to share that message with thousands of Ogdenites who have responded. I talked about my grandpa, I've talked about my grandma, I've talked about my mom. These are all people who taught me the values of hard work and of discipline. And you all did that too. I said earlier that people like me are not meant to run for mayor. Not only are we not meant to run for mayor, but we're also not meant to win the primary and be in this general election, and we did that. And so really tonight I'm sitting on the stage asking for people who are watching to really investigate this conversation of who should be leading our next city. Visit taylorforogden.com, research our policy ideas, call me. My number is listed on the bottom. It goes right to me. I do pick up. If you're more comfortable with an email, the email is there as well. But this is going to be one of the most important elections our city has ever had. This is an election that will determine our involvement in the community renewable energy program and ensuring that our environment is sustainable for our kids. This is an election that will determine a safe and secure community and the installation of practices that will keep us safer. This is an election that will determine the economic vibrancy of our community moving forward and ensuring that our community can, at any age and any stage, live, work, and play right here in our city. So I have an open door policy. I want people to call me and engage in this conversation because the ideas we've talked about today are crucial to our future success. And these are the conversations I will continue to show up for. Again, thank you all for being here, and do not forget to vote on November 21st. And I hope to earn both your trust and your respect, but your vote on November 21st. Thanks for being here.
Here in Ogden. Certainly, thank you, Taylor. We express our appreciation for your willingness to be here. For all of those here at Wildcat Theater on the campus of Weber State University, for those of you who are online, thank you also for coming. As mentioned, ballots are going to be coming out far faster than any of us would probably expect.
Sure.
Election day is the 21st of November this year. As you make your final decisions, we hope that you certainly look at all of the issues, that you talk to the candidates, reach out to them, get information that you might need, and then, of course, vote. And with that, thank you and good night.